Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hey everyone, good afternoon. I'm Susan Kaufman. I'm in for Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts webinar series. I'd like to welcome back all of our Attitude listeners, whether you're tuning in today to the live webinar, whether you're listening to the podcast version a few weeks from now, or you're watching the webinar replay. Today's topic could not be more timely for all of us who are trying to balance working from home while simultaneously maintaining a rich learning environment for our children. Our guest speaker and expert, Ann Dolin, has stepped up really in a timely fashion to help us with ideas for keeping your children in study mode during this extremely unstructured and anxiety-producing time while they're home from school and you may be trying to work. So, Ann, thank you so much for being available on such short notice, just when we're all together and needing your advice. We're so grateful to you, as always.
Thank you, Susan.
It's our pleasure. I want to introduce Ann to you briefly. You may have had the good fortune to listen to previous of her webinars, which have always been exceedingly helpful. She has more than 25 years of teaching and tutoring experience, a former public school teacher in Fairfax County, Virginia, who founded a company called Educational Connections, a tutoring and test prep company that has worked with more than 10,000 students in the Washington, D.C. area. Her first book, called Homework Made Simple, has won numerous awards. And she has a new book called Getting Past Procrastination, How to Help Your Kids Get Organized, Focused, and Motivated Without Being the Bad Guy. And that's a go-to guide for parents that cuts to the root of the fact that procrastination is not a character flaw. It's just behavior that parents and children can address and can improve. So thank you again for joining us, Ann. I want to make just a few notes. Podcast listeners, if you want to visit the webinar replay page on attitudemag.com for Ann Dolin's webinar, you'll be able to access the slides that she'll be discussing that are accompanying this presentation. And for those of you who are interested in an attendance certificate, please look for the questions marked required for certificate at the end of the presentation. Stay on the line in both the live and the replay versions. Complete these and you'll receive the certificate of attendance by mail. Note that that's not a CE credit, but a certificate of attendance. So with that, let me turn it over to Ann again with our thanks for being here today.
Susan, it's great to talk to you, and welcome parents. I'm so glad you're on the line today because we really have a problem in so many homes. We have become educators, and it's really a role that no parent ever expected themselves to be in. And in fact, not only have parents become educators and teachers of their own kids, but they've kind of like become the homeschool police. And it's certainly a role we never signed up for and our kids don't want us to have. And it's especially difficult when the student has ADHD. And part of that is that the student wants to be in vacation mode and we want our kids to be in study mode. And oftentimes when intentions are different, they're ripe for conflict. And in many homes, that's what's happening to our families. It's so difficult to get our kids to focus and get work done when we're trying to do a million other things at the same time, like work from home and manage other kids and just keep it all together. So you're certainly not alone. So what do you do when everything feels so chaotic? The number one thing you want to do is to create a routine. And it starts out with 5 basic things that are really easy. The first one is, at what time should your child get up in the morning? What time is breakfast? What time is lunch? What time is dinner? And what time will your child go to bed at the end of the night? The reason having times for those things is important is because kids crave routines, especially kids with ADHD. If they don't know what to expect and everything's super loosey-goosey, it's really harder for them to follow through. When you have a routine, life is just a little bit easier. It's more like it's on autopilot. So how do you do this? If you haven't done it already, how do you create a simple routine with your child? The easiest thing, although you can find lots of fancy schedules online, is just to open up Microsoft Word and type in the word schedule when you open a new document. And there you will find lots of different templates that you can use. For examples, you can just go to your browser, Google, and type in homeschool schedule, and you'll see lots of different examples. I want to warn you that many of the routines or the schedules that you see online that include the basics like getting up, having your meals, and going to bed are filled with lots of little time periods, like these little half-hour increments, half hour to do this, half hour to do that, another time to do this other thing. And if you have executive function difficulties, if getting organized is hard for you, you do not want to pick a schedule that's on half-hour increments. It's just really hard to stick to. And if it's hard for you, it's going to be super hard for your child. So you're going to want to have a more flexible routine. So I want to share with you one that I created that actually has lots of stuff in it. And then I want to show you how to bring it down a little bit. So here's one that has lots of time periods. Wake up, have breakfast, have study time. And you can see here that at 9 o'clock, the study time for elementary kids is in stations. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But the study time for older kids is just their study time. Then you'll see that the next thing that they're going to do is 11 o'clock. So there's a 2-hour block of study time. Now, if your student has ADHD or your student doesn't, 2 hours at one time is way too long. You have to break it down into shorter increments, ideally 25 minutes. And I'll tell you why in just a moment. But then kids got to get out. They can walk the dog, they can get outside, they have lunch, and then after lunch, they have read aloud. There's lots of other things you can do during the day. At dinner, definitely they should be part of the chores and cleaning up. You can have family time afterwards. It could be a board game, whatever you decide to do. And then there's a time to wind down and go to bed. So if you want to make it even simpler, you should have a wake up time, definitely a breakfast time, a block of time in the morning. And then after lunch, maybe you have a read aloud time or just silent reading. And then the rest of the day can be less structured. Here's actually a study or a schedule that my brother-in-law made for his 2 kids. And it's actually really specific. So you can see that it kind of mimics school. They get up at 7:15 and they get ready for the day, take a shower, all that stuff. At 7:45, my sister-in-law has the kitchen and it's open for breakfast. So she doesn't have a specific breakfast time. They have to make their own breakfast, but that's when the kitchen's open. The kitchen closes at 8:30, and then at 8:30, school begins. They need to be sitting down, and it goes until 10 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, they have a break. The kitchen's open for lunch at 11:30. It's closed for lunch at 12:15. They get up, go outside, take a walk around the neighborhood, and they're back to school. School's out at 3, and then kids do some homework after 3, and then kitchen's open for dinner. I'll tell you why this works in her family. A couple of reasons. One, she is super organized, and so is her husband. So something like this works for them. But it may not work for, say, their neighbor who has more of difficulty sticking with very specific schedules. But the reason it also works is because their school already has web-based instruction, and they are lucky. If your school district has rolled out time where the teacher is online and the kids are receiving instruction on the other end, it's so helpful. So in this case, at 9 o'clock, the math teacher comes online. She does a math lesson. Then they have a quick break. That's from 9 to 9:45. At 10 o'clock, the language arts teacher comes online, does the lesson. They have history at 11. They take a lunch break, and they have 2 more classes in the afternoon. So it really mimics what school is like, and it's easy for everybody. However, the reality is not every school district is like that. Some school districts just dole out the work and say, okay, you need to do this, that, and the other thing, and it's due on Friday. Or you might get a packet for your elementary schooler. When that happens, that's when you're going to have to create the schedule of study time. It's a little bit harder from this. But what's harder yet, and what's happened in our area, Northern Virginia, is that the school district here has said to kids, we're not going to push any assignments out for at least another 2 weeks. And when we do, everything is going to be optional and not graded. which in theory sounds fabulous. But in reality, if you have a kid with ADHD, it's not great because there's no accountability. I've talked to a number of parents in the last couple of days, and they say, it's just really hard because I try to get to do them. Actually, some of the teachers have sent home a few things, and these parents have said, I tried to get my kids to do this, and they say, why bother? It's optional, and it's not graded. And that's the hardest part. And when that happens, really, you have to take a different approach, which we'll talk about. So this is a schedule I created with my son. He's a senior in high school, and he swore up and down he doesn't need a schedule. Well, I still want him to have a schedule because if I don't, I know he'd be up in his room on his laptop for most of the day. And I just don't want that. He's going to be already alone a lot, and I want him to have a routine. So he's up and out of bed at 8:30. He has breakfast. He walks the dogs. And then he has study time from 9:45 to 11. And I put his 3 main subjects down, and he just picks what he wants to do. And in the afternoon, 11:15 after a break, he has calculus, and he has a calculus tutor. So I just have his calculus tutor working online with him. And that works great. So every student is a little bit different. I've also found that this is definitely the hardest part for parents. It's actually not that they figuring out what they have to do. It's actually creating the schedule. And in fact, it's interesting that we never had this role before in my tutoring and executive function coaching business, but it's now a service. It's a 1-hour service we offer just to help parents create the schedule. We actually work directly with the kids, so they take more ownership of it. And we're finding great success because they just kind of need that jump start to get started. So if that's difficult for you and you're feeling conflict, bring somebody else in and it's okay. So what do you do with that time? I mentioned an hour and a half or 2 hours of study time. For any kid, especially a kid with ADHD, that's just way too long. They're not going to be able to sustain it unless they take that time and they say, okay, I'm going to segment this. I'm going to chunk it. And I love the idea of this Pomodoro tomato. I remember when I was growing up in the late 70s, my mother had one of these in the kitchen, and it's just like tomato kitchen timer. And it's interesting that this technique is called the Pomodoro technique because it was researched by an Italian, and in Italian, Pomodoro means tomato. This researcher found that when people had a specific amount of time, they were more attentive and more motivated to do a task. So he wanted to see actually, well, what is that specific amount of time? Is it like an hour? Is it 20 minutes? Is it an hour and a half? Is it 45 minutes? What is it? And he found that for adults, the sweet spot is 25 minutes. So for kids, especially our older kids, they can generally sustain for about that long. Maybe a little bit, definitely a little bit less for a younger child. But let's say the student has to do some history. They can do it one of two ways. They can say to themselves, look, I'm going to read this chapter and then I'll take a break. So that's chunking time by task, or they can chunk it by time. I'm going to set the timer for 25 minutes. And I'm going to work as hard as I can, best I can, focus as much as I can, just for 25 minutes. And when the timer goes off, I can take a break. So what he found in his research is the break time should be about 5 minutes. And he also found that you should never do more than 4 Pomodoros in a row because it just defeats, it just kind of deflates your motivation level. So for adults, it's Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro. However, for students like middle and high school kids, it maybe is just 2 Pomodoros in a row and then a longer break and maybe another Pomodoro. All right, so we've talked about schedules. They should be basic. If you have a super resistant kid, and I've talked to lots of people who do, and you can only get them to do 45 minutes of work, start there. An hour is ideal, an hour and a half is better. But if you talk to homeschooling parents who do this because they love to do this, not because they've been thrust into it, they do not replicate the day. They do not have 7-hour days with their children. Instead, they dial it back to about 2 hours a day plus some reading. So really, if you have a resistant kid and you can get them to do 2 hours of work, that's fabulous. But if you can't, it's okay. Don't stress about it. move the timer a little bit shorter, see what they're willing to do, and have a conversation with them. And don't say, all right, your time today is from 9 to 11. You don't want to do that. Instead, you want to say, hey, can we talk about a schedule? Set up an appointment with your child. It makes them feel like an adult, like you care and you respect them. Can we talk about this after dinner tonight? Sit down with your child and explain how you're feeling. I'm just a little bit worried that with you being out of school for so long that things might feel really unstructured. What if we set up a time for homework or for learning? I'm thinking of time in the morning. Let's come up with a plan and invite them in to try to figure it out with you. So once you have a general schedule, then you have to deal with the W's, the where, the what, and the when. So let's start out with the when. I mentioned a couple of times that I like having instruction in the morning, and I'm going to share with you why. This is from a book called Dan Pink. Author is Dan Pink, and the book is When, and it's fabulous. So if you want to read a great book while your kids are home, I really recommend this. It's just really helpful in knowing not only what time of the day your brain is more in tune, but things like what time of the day should you have surgery? What time of the day should you do just about anything. It's fascinating. But he found that for human energy and motivation, there's definitely peaks and valleys throughout our day. Now, when we get up in the morning, our energy level and our attention is kind of flat. But as we go through the morning, it gets better and better. It goes up and up until it peaks. It's really the best at around lunchtime. And then after lunchtime, it starts to go down, and it goes down much lower than it even started out at the very beginning of the day. It goes into this trough. And the trough is around 3 o'clock, which is interesting because that's when our kids come home from school on typical days, not like it is now, and they're super resistant to doing work and they don't want anything to do with it. And that's because they're in a trough. They can't get their brains in the right mood to do the work. So we know that right around dinner time or right before we start to have a recovery, we're never quite as good as we were around lunchtime, but we're still okay. And then after dinner, we kind of level off until we go to bed. But for some people, about 10% of the population, they are night owls, and they do see a spike in energy later on. So that's why doing that chunk of time, at least doing the things that are hardest, like the math and language arts, especially writing for some of our kids with ADHD, those things should be done in the morning. The things that are easy for our kids, like maybe reading for pleasure, or that should be after lunch later in the day. So we talked about what time, but let's talk about the frequency, because that's important too. So what we don't want to do is say, okay, you have all this work to do, and the student says, you know what, I'm just going to do it all on Tuesday. If you have a super resistant kid and you are fighting battle after battle after battle, let them do it on Tuesday. But ideally, if they take that Tuesday work and they space it out to a little bit every day, it's much better. And the reason is there is this thing called the forgetting curve. And the forgetting curve shows us that when we learn something and we have it in our mind, when we learn it from a book or our teacher online or in a lecture in class, we have it solid in our minds. But very quickly, that information starts to leave our brains. 24 hours later, we've only remembered about 50% of what we've learned. The problem is a week later, we only know 10% of what we've learned. So if kids are only doing something once a week, it's not that helpful because they're really forgetting it and then they have to relearn it again. I explain this idea to kids all the time when we're working on study skills. And in fact, I'm putting together this coronavirus rescue kit for parents and kids, and I'll have this part in it. And by the way, if I can help you with any of this, I'm creating this ebook. It's all about coronavirus tips. I've collected probably 10 schedules from all different kinds of parents that I'm putting into it. All the things I'm talking about, I'm going to explain in detail in this ebook. And I don't have it quite ready yet. I will have it ready by the end of the day. And it's at EC Tutoring, E as in Edward, C as in cat, tutoring.com/CV for coronavirus. So all you have to do is put in your email and I'll send it to you later today. So I explain to kids that if you have a test on Friday and you study for an hour on Thursday, that's good. You studied. However, and you'll probably, to be honest, do just fine on Friday because you've crammed and you know it short term. But if you took that same hour and you broke it up into 20 minutes Tuesday, 20 minutes Wednesday, 20 minutes Thursday, not only are you going to do well on Friday, but you're going to do well later on for a unit test or a midterm or a final because you've stretched it out and you've slept on it. And sleep is a powerful tool for remembering. Sleep helps us to consolidate information. But if you only cram, and that's your MO, your method of operation for studying, you don't remember it later on because the forgetting curve is very active. You might know it the next day, but you're not going to know it in 3 weeks. So we often work with kids to help them set up their schedules so that they're just doing a little bit every day. Let's talk about where will your kids work? Well, if you have elementary kids that need to be active and they're not going to do well sitting down the whole time, I would recommend to set up the Montessori approach. And you may have heard of Montessori if you have little kids, you've probably heard about it. I remember my youngest son, when he was in preschool, he went to a Montessori class for a couple of years. And everything, all the furniture is super little, it's kid size. And everything is very manipulative based. And so the kids go from station to station. Like there's a block station and there's a letter tile station. And in his case, there was a polishing silver station, which is part of the cleaning station. And there's just tons of hands-on activities and they rotate and they get to pick what they want to do. You can do that for your kids too, especially in elementary school. So one station they should have is a reading station. So have them go around the house, collect all their books, and put it in their reading station. If they have assignments in math that they have in a book or worksheets, make part of the table a math station. Maybe you have a Lego station or a puzzle station. Maybe they have to do things within their science, so they have a science station. But set the timer for about 25 minutes, and when it goes off, let them go from station to station. And it's their job to stay busy in a station. It's not for you to entertain them. That's their job. Now, when they're in middle and high school, they don't need stations, but it is helpful for them to have a couple of locations to do their homework, do their work, and it shouldn't be their bedroom. Kids are going to be alone a lot, as I mentioned, so letting them stay in their bedrooms all day long is not a good idea. And if you have a kid that's giving you pushback, say, look, what if you stayed? If you have a 2-story house, you're down here on the first floor in the morning and you can go in your room in the afternoon if you want. That's better than in your room all day, especially for extroverts. This is going to be really hard on kids that really thrive from social relationships. So they can also have a timer where if they want, you can teach them this technique where they just work on math and then they work on their science, they can read, and they just kind of manage their self during that time. So the next thing is, what are they going to do? This is the third W, and it's actually the hardest W because it's different for every school district. Now, if you're in a school district that's already rolled out online instruction, it's so much easier for you as a parent. That's awesome, but unfortunately, not a lot of school districts have done that yet. If, however, your school has assigned work, that's the second best. So at least now your child has something to do, and that's good. So I'll show you in a minute how to break that down with them. But if your school hasn't done anything yet and they say, look, we haven't even thought about this, it could be a month before we get stuff out to you, that's when you're probably going to want to take action and help them find something to do during that time, which I'll explain to you in just a second. So let's say that the school has assigned you work, has assigned the student work. What I would recommend is to go online with your child and see exactly what they have to do. And then I would recommend that you help them create a to-do list of the things that they have to do that week. And you put those things on a whiteboard. They write it, not you. And it's in a public place, like in your kitchen or something like that. And if you don't have a whiteboard, that's okay. They can have maybe the first page of their binder is their to-do list, whatever it might be. If you have 3 kids and 3 whiteboards, that's awesome. But if you don't, just a piece of paper is fine. And so it's going to kind of look like this, where on the right, you have the weekly things that they need to get done. And this is exactly what we do when we first start kids out. We help them to understand, all right, do you have assigned work or do you not? If you do, this is how we're going to organize it. And if you don't, we're going to help you find the things that you can be doing. So if they do, they're going to write out all their weekly objectives. So for example, you can see in this one, read to chapter 7 in the book Wonder. Math, they have to do the unit review on page 60 and do these math problems. So they have kind of what they have to do for the week. And then they're going to have their marching orders for the day. And that is their daily to-do list, which they figure out, all right, I have to be done reading to chapter 7 on Friday. I'm going to read chapters 4 and 5 today. Something like that. So they're going to really create their to-do list. And sometimes they need, especially if they have ADHD, they need somebody to help them get started. So even if they're really unwilling to do this, but they're willing to write a couple things down, they won't have 2 lists, but they'll just have a to-do for the day, even if it's a few things, that is fine too. All right, so what do you do if they have nothing at all? Well, there's lots of things you can actually do, and they're kind of easy. One is you can get a lot of free stuff now because due to school closures, parents can find things that used to be required for subscriptions that are not anymore. For example, Scholastic Learn at Home. Learn at Home did require a monthly fee, but now it's completely free. Same with Brain Pop, which I'll show you in a second. Other ones like IXL.com I really like too. And that's a combination of free and paid now. So if your child has nothing to do, I would show them a couple of resources and ask them which one might work for you, and then figure out what they might agree to do. So let me show you an example. This is from Brain Pop. And on Brain Pop, when you pull it up, you need to create your own account. So the parent has to create their own account. It's free. And then at the bottom, you can see all the subjects that they offer, like science and social studies, English, and they also have health, they have art, music, engineering. You can take coding classes. It kind of looks juvenile, but it's really not. This goes up to high school students. And if you have a younger child, like a primary, kindergarten through grades 4 and 5, they can go on Brain Pop Junior. It's a completely different site. So let's say you click social studies. Well, here you can see all the things you can learn in social studies. You can learn about economics or geography or ancient cultures, elections, which is kind of timely, famous historical figures. And you click on one of those and it takes you to this beautiful page where you watch a video and then you do other activities. It kind of like assigns you a little bit of homework and has fun things that you can do that are interactive. And what I really like about Brain Pop is it also gives kids a quiz. And quizzes are important for kids because it kind of lets their brain know, I know this, or I don't. And they can see their level of mastery. You know, they might know some things, but not others, so they can go back and study it and take the quiz again. So anything with a built-in quiz is way better for kids than just to learn how to multiply fractions. That's a little bit harder if there's no checkpoints for what they're learning. Oh, and also Brain Pop. Oh my gosh, so many kids are anxious right now about the coronavirus and they don't really understand it. They often think, I'm going to get it. I've had kids tell me, I'm going to get it. I could die. They're so nervous, even though they hear from their parents, well, really, it's okay. You would be fine if you got it. I like that Brain Pop has brainpop.com/coronavirus. It's actually a video and activities for kids to learn the science behind it. And there's even a little quiz. So the other thing I want to share with you as we wrap up is it's so important for kids to stay in touch with each other, not just you. They need their peers. So if their school isn't doing anything with social interaction, really encourage them to set up study groups. with their friends in the same class. If they're reading a book, say Catcher in the Rye, they can talk about chapter 1 after they read it together. That's really valuable. I see our role in working with kids similarly in that, a lot of our kids, when left to their own devices, they won't do anything at all. So part of our role is not only helping them to complete the work and stay fresh with what they're learning, but also to provide that personal interaction and that level of motivation to keep them going online. And then also, if they don't have friends to do a book group with, they can join one on brightly.com. So if you're going to work with a friend or a tutor or anybody else, I recommend Zoom. And Zoom is a super easy software to use. I wish I had stock in it because it's like exploding now and everybody and their brother is using it. But it's great because kids can not only see each other, but they can share screens. I also have found value in another add-on to Zoom that they can just drop into the screen, and it's called bitpaper.io. And I really like this software because it allows kids to work with their peers or another adult and write on a whiteboard, and they can actually both write on the whiteboard at the same time and see each other's writing. So you can see this example of looks like a kind of difficult math problem. And you can also see two people that are, they can see each other visually on the software. But in reality, because so many people are online now and bitpaper.io is really overwhelmed, I would say that doesn't always work. So the best thing is to use Zoom, and then you go to bitpaper.io and open up the browser there, and you can just drop in the whiteboard, and that's the better way to see it. So what do you do with all your stuff? It needs to be fairly organized. If you have an extra binder, label it the coronavirus binder, and that's where papers are going to be stored. Kids with ADHD typically don't love to hole punch and file. So if that is your kid, it may be unreasonable to expect them to do that. Instead, an accordion binder works great. So they can label the tabs with their subjects, and this is more for younger kids because most older kids have everything electronic. When they're done with the paper, they just put it in the back of that section, and therefore it's just chronologically organized as they go. And for older kids, they're going to do best housing their documents online in a software they use all the time, which is typically Google Drive. If they're turning in things to school, great. And if they're not, they can create a new coronavirus folder. So that's just a way to keep kids organized. I'm here for you, and I'm happy to answer questions during this webinar, which we'll do in just a second, but also after this webinar. And you can always contact me. Email is best at Ann@EC Tutoring. And if you want to sign up and you want me to send you that coronavirus ebook that I'll be done with later today, you can put your email in ectutoring.com/CV for coronavirus. All right, and so that will wrap it up for me.
Thank you, Ann. That's so great. I just want to repeat and to point out to everyone, ectutoring.com/CV for Ann's book. We will also, a number of you have asked whether we could send out that link to the listeners of the webinar, and we will do that. So in case you didn't get it now, and you think one of you said, I have ADHD, I can't remember this. So we'll send it to you. Do not worry. So this is fascinating. And I'd like to ask all the listeners to post their questions. This is your time. And we'll take as many questions as we have time for. Let me just look at these questions. There's so many. Here's a good one. How do I convey to teenagers that this is not spring break or winter break? I have this argument with my child every morning.
Yeah, you can expect that argument. I had that same argument with my son, who's a senior, the other day, because actually it is a spring break, and which makes it really hard. And I said, look, Ethan, like the next 3 months are going to be your spring break probably. So let's set up a schedule now. It's not a role that I didn't expect to have this role. I know you didn't expect to learn at home. But let's have a discussion over what is something small you can do every day just to keep up with your studies. And sometimes if you approach it like that, like what's something small you can do, and ask a question instead of telling kids what to do, it usually goes better. Kind of like when kids come home from school, our natural reaction is to say, do you have homework? But if they're old enough, a better question is something like, what are your priorities today? Like what might you do first, second, or third? Just like, even if they don't tell you verbally, it just kind of gets them thinking about a little to-do list in their head. So that's all you want to do, is to say what's something little you could do to get started, or how much time could you commit to? And just ask them those questions, and they're usually honest. And a lot of times, they're not, even though we think they're going to say, I refuse to do anything, chances are they're willing to do something. And if you feel like you are being the bad guy and you have become the homework police, it's okay to get outside help. I'm happy to help you. Or email the teacher and ask, I am getting a lot of pushback from my child. What do you recommend? Are you going to have anything that's due? What are the expectations here? And when will I know? Because sometimes we just don't know a lot quite yet.
Okay. I want to just switch to a question about working at home. A number of people have said, that in order for them to get their work done, they need their children to be relatively self-motivated to take this schedule and run with it. I guess my question to you would be, is that realistic? At what age is that realistic? And how would a parent, make that happen? There are a number of people here who are really struggling to get their own work done, both in terms of space, not having the space to do it, and in terms of just, the responsibility of their child's education as well.
Yeah, I was talking to a mom earlier today. She has 4 kids. She has a 9-year-old, twin 11-year-olds, and a 13-year-old. And she said what she's found to be the most helpful. At first, she works from home too, and she said, I was just so mad at them, especially the younger kids, the twins and the 9-year-old, because she's super type A and organized, and she's very like, okay, let's get this done. And she expected them to be like that too. And so it was really frustrating in her, and this is only after a couple of days, that they would not do the work independently. So she found that she had to help the younger kids get started, and they had to have super clear expectations at first of what they were going to do. And then they were actually a lot better. Now, the 9-year-old still required a little bit more hand holding because of the age, but that's generally the idea, is to make sure your child knows exactly what to do. They can do the first few on their own, and they can get started and then walk away. And it's okay to say, look, I've got to work on this. You need to give me from 11 to 11:45. And then if you have a question, come over at 11:45 and I'll help you. If you're super stuck and you don't know what to do, what would be your options? And ask them the question. If you're stuck on your own, you don't want to just sit there. What are your options to do something else? And have that dialogue before they even start.
Okay. Yeah, I think resistance, especially an issue among the parents of older kids. So, having, I think your suggestion about maybe only half the day in your room, some specific timing issues. How long should the break be? Is a 15-minute break enough? How do you judge the breaks?
It depends on the length of time they're doing the work. So if it's, 25 minutes, the break is short, like not more than 5 minutes. If they've been sitting there for an hour and a half, the break is definitely longer. And ideally, if it's a break for something like lunch, it's also to go outside too. And, our kids are going to be trapped in our homes a lot of the time. So anytime, I had one mom tell me the other day, I have built into their schedule for an hour for them to go outside and practice their sport. I'm like, wow, an hour, like that seems like super long to me. You're making your kid go outside for an hour to practice their sport. She's like, oh my God, you wouldn't believe what they come up with. They're playing games. They're like, they're creating, they make makeshift soccer goals. They did all these things. It's probably easier if you have more kids to do that. But in general, helping them to figure out what their breaks are before. So, you don't want to let them get started and then it's not clear what their break is going to be. It should be generally discussed before, but it's okay if it's not to the T. And as I mentioned in the beginning, some things are going to be easier for some parents than others. So we can't give ourselves up as parents. Like we set up the schedule and it didn't work. you know what, it might not work because it's fresh and you have to try it for usually about 3 days to see it doesn't not really work. Or is it just that your kid is pushing back because they're not used to this and they will fall in line? So typically give it a few days first. And then if it really doesn't work, then you reconvene with your child and try to figure out something else. But if it really doesn't work, it might be that it's too hard to follow. And it might be you don't need a super specific schedule. In fact, you need more of a fluid routine. So in fact, it might be like from 9 to 11 is working time. You can do whatever you want during that time as long as it's working. You have lunch, and then from 1 to 3, you just kind of chill out, and then you have to decide, is that with a screen or without a screen? And so you have longer blocks of time, but there's a little bit more freedom to the student.
That raises a question that's come up a fair amount. What about screen time? And I guess parallel and sort of part of that is, do you recommend using rewards or incentives as part of the schedule, the work schedule?
Sure. So, Susan, I'm sorry, what was the first question again before the
just screen time in general? Should screen time be part of the day? How do you fit it in? And then for many people, that's also tied into offering screen time as an incentive, which leading to the question of, should there be incentives, for finishing your 25-minute, section of work?
Right. So screen time, it depends on the age of the student. If you have a student where pretty much everything's online and the school is giving them assignments, they just need their computer. They don't necessarily need their phone, even though they say they have to have their phone. They really don't. I've not met many kids that really do need their phone, but they do need their laptop. And there's actually a couple of software programs that can work for kids. So let's say that you have a 17-year-old that does, you don't want to approach the battle of you don't need your phone. And they're like, you know what? I'm a junior in high school. I'm going to have my phone if I want to have my phone. There are some software programs that can really help. And the first one is Forest for your phone. And you basically set it for a specific amount of time, say 20 minutes. And in that 20 minutes on the screen, the home screen of your phone, a tree grows and it takes over your whole home screen. So you can't see the apps. And it grows for 20 minutes and there's a timer so you can see the time counting down. And that's kind of like a visual to you to say, all right, I'm not going to touch my phone. I'm going to really work on what I have to do. Similarly, on your laptop, there are also controls you can use. One is called Stay Focused, which is a Chrome extension. And this would be great for an older student who has a lot of work on their laptop. Stay Focused, and the other one is, Self-Control. Self-Control is for Macs, and Stay Focused is a Chrome extension. And they kind of do the same thing. So kids will know which websites that are really distracting to them. Like pretty much all the time, it's YouTube or it's Netflix. And they basically type in the websites that they really want to resist for that period of time. And the app will blacklist those sites. So they can't go to those sites, whether they try to reboot their computer or try to delete the app. They really can't go to those websites. So it's just kind of like a visual reminder to kids, like, okay, I'm in study mode. I really want to resist these things so that I can get this done. And I find those things, we teach those things to kids all the time, because at some point as a parent, you don't want to be the taskmaster. Like, get off of your computer. I thought you said you were doing homework. Why are you on Netflix? But these are just ways for kids to kind of start to monitor their self. And it's really important, especially as they go off to college, because they're not going to have anybody there to monitor these things for them. Okay. And then you ask for rewards. So for rewards, I think rewards are perfectly fine. If they are screen time, you can't offer screen time any other time of the day. So like if you say you can play, what might it be in the afternoon? I'm not sure. Fortnite, for example. But you also allow them to do it throughout the day on breaks, it's not as valuable. So if you want to use Fortnite as the carrot, then you say, look, if I see that you've gotten this work done during your study block and you show me it's completed, you can play Fortnite at 3:00. That would be a better idea than just kind of letting free reign of Fortnite and then also saying it's a reward, because it really isn't at that point. So I think rewards are great. Kids will do a lot for time with technology, but again, it can't be offered at any other time of the day. But even little things like, hey, you know what, if you get all this done, let's make a dessert together. Or you pick the game tonight, you pick the music. For little kids, it's those little things that mean a lot. As kids get older, we teach them to deal with their own rewards. You know, what can you do to reward yourself for getting this done? You look forward to it, and that's going to make you feel good. What might you pick? And so then kids start to regulate their own behavior and think about, well, what would be a good thing once I get this done? Maybe it's to get up and get a snack, for example.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. So a question as to what, if a parent successfully puts in place a schedule like this Monday through Friday, just like school, what should they do on the weekend? Should they, this person, listener is saying that her kids are going to get really tired of being at home on the weekends.
Yeah.
I think that's especially an urban problem, I guess.
I know. I know, it's so hard. It just really stinks, I'm not sure what will happen within the next week. Will we be confined to our homes? Can we walk our dogs? Like, what is that going to be like? It's going to be different. So, I would say on weekends, let kids do whatever they want within reason. Like, you don't want to say, you can play Call of Duty for 12 hours on Saturday and Sunday. Like, certainly you don't want to do that. But if you have a resistant kid, I would not make them do any schoolwork on the weekends.
Okay, that makes sense to me. It's the weekend, yeah. What about kids that don't want to go outside? I know that's not so uncommon. And here's someone who said her child's beginning to resist the idea of going outside for exercise breaks, fresh air.
I would go outside with them and don't make it optional. From 12 to 12:20, we're going to take a walk around the block, and just make it part of the routine and don't make it negotiable, because everybody has to get outside. So I would just insist upon it. And if he gives you a hard time, say, you know what, I can understand why you don't want to do this. We're going to do this now. And then later on, you can do whatever it is. That's the reward. Okay.
Yeah. And certainly a lot of adults build in a walk at a certain time, for the same reason. So yeah, schedules are so good. There are some parents here who are coping with what must be very difficult, and that is several children at different ages.
Yeah.
Any suggestions for multiple children working, as one person says, in the same space?
Yeah, that is super hard. It's not so bad when you have kids that are kind of close in age, although they might fight more than other kids. But when they're really different and they have different attention spans, I was talking to a mom yesterday, and she has a 13-year-old and a 5-year-old. Well, that's super different. And so the 13-year-old obviously can sustain attention a lot longer than the 5-year-old. So what we talked about and what she's going to do is set up little stations for the 5-year-old, like coloring stations and a craft station and an art station, so that they're more things that she loves to do, that she likes. Because anytime you like something, you can sustain your attention far longer than if you're doing something you don't like. That's why kids can play video games and not even look up for 3 hours, but you ask them to do some math problems and they're in and out of attention in 10 minutes. So find what your kid really loves, even at a very young age, set up stations, and still set up an expectation. Like, okay, for 30 minutes, you're going to do your homework, and you're going to go to these art stations, do whatever you want, but it is quiet time for both of you. And it's going to be a little bit different, the timing, but I would still say have a routine as best you can.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. There are some schools, as you mentioned, who have said that this is optional or not graded. Do you have any suggestions for how to manage the resistance that follows from that?
Well, it's interesting because I just think it makes things really hard on parents, like super hard, because the minute kids get wind of that, they're all over it. Like, okay, well, why do I have to do that? So it kind of depends what they're in and what they have next year. So for example, if they still need to stay strong in math, you can always talk to them about, you still have to keep up your skills because next year you're going to be in Algebra 1 if they're in pre-algebra, for example. I would also look at online programs for them and sign them up, ask them which ones they want to do. But they have to do something. Because if they're not going to do their work because it's not graded, then they can do something else that basically does the lesson for them. It's kind of like having the teacher there, but the teacher isn't there. And so that's why Brain Pop is really good. Khan Academy is really good. IXL, which I mentioned, is really great. So if they're not going to do their pre-algebra, they might be willing to do something else that's kind of a substitute, but it's more engaging for them. We've seen that with older kids that are in advanced classes, like they're in AP classes right now. And what I found is the College Board, which produces the AP exam, is still holding the AP exam, but it will likely be online and at home. So we're still having kids prepare for it and study for it and do the material because they're still going to have to take it.
Okay, great. Yeah. Oh my goodness. There's someone here who says, I am overwhelmed. I have 4 boys in 3 different grades, all of whom, including me, have ADHD. Good luck. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. There are some teachers listening in who are asking if you have any advice for teachers who are working remotely.
I did a webinar the other day, and I was surprised because it's for parents, and I had a ton of teachers on it. And
we often do, actually, yeah.
Yeah, and I love that because things that like I thought were common sense actually aren't required from teachers by their administrators. So, for example, one teacher said, do you think it would be helpful for me to send out a schedule and say, this would be a really good schedule for your kids? And I said, oh my gosh, that would be amazing, because if it comes from you, it's way better than if it comes from mom or dad, because kids are just more likely to listen to the teacher, especially if you say, this is what we're doing. This is what your schedule is going to look like. So if you can send out a schedule and say, this is a good way to set up your day, and the other thing is you give the kids the information at night or first thing in the morning so they can create their to-do list, it's helpful. But I'm also hearing from parents is part of the problem is even when they're getting work, it's super disorganized. So like one teacher is sending it at 9, one teacher is not waiting till 3, one teacher is sending it at night, like it's all over the place. So the kids just can't get their heads around it. So if you're a teacher and you can send it to the kids by 8 o'clock in the morning or the night before, that's amazing. And it really, really helps parents to help kids figure out what they have to do that day.
Okay. I wonder if you could just repeat some of this you said, but just, went by fairly quickly, repeat some of the websites that you have found to be very useful for people who are teaching their children at home. I remember you said Brain Pop and Scholastic were the 2 that I remembered, if you want to recap perhaps.
Sure. Brain Pop Junior, a Scholastic Learn at Home that has pretty much everything you need, but also IXL. And IXL started out as mostly a math website, but now there's pretty much everything, and it's super specific. For example, in math, it has every strand that your child needs to know, and it teaches them how to do the problems. They practice, and then they do them on their own, and then there's a little quiz. So those types of things where the learning is built in, and there's, either the software or a teacher or a video on the other line providing it, is actually better than, the student just kind of learning on his own, unless it's an independent study thing. I've had other parents that I've talked to that said, their kids have been able to do more of what they love. So I've still put in an hour and a half where they do their work, but then I've let them do independent study. And I saw this yesterday with my own son. He had his work to do, but then in the afternoon, he built a snowboard jump and out of wood. And it actually required a lot of math. And he had to get this wood that he nailed together and made this little ramp. And I thought that something like that, even though it's not on a standards of learning, was just a great way to pass the time and to do something he found to be really productive and that he enjoyed doing. So anything hands-on is way better than like searching the internet or watching Netflix for a long period of time.
Right. You mentioned a specific app that had a tree growing on it. Could you repeat that? Describe that.
Sure. That one's called Forest. It's just for your
right.
phone. But if you want one for your laptop, Stay Focused is one, and also Self-Control. So Self-Control is the one for Macs, and Stay Focused is the Chrome extension.
And both of those allow you to list specific websites that are then blocked. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And do they tend to work better with older children then, or?
Yes, definitely. Usually, middle and high school kids.
Right.
And then the other thing we always encourage kids to do, it's a little bit harder for a parent to suggest this, but often somebody else is better. In fact, I've been working on a class for kids on study skills, and I have this in there. So I haven't finished it yet. I'll probably have it finished by early next week, and I'll send it out to you if you sign up for this information. But it has this in it, and anytime kids can start to regulate their own behavior, it's way better than a parent telling them.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. So, and this has just been so helpful. And we're really grateful to you for all of this. Everyone, don't forget to wait. We'll send you out a reminder of Anne's website where I think she said you'll find some more resources by the end of the day. And here at Attitude, you will find a webinar next week on making friends. This is for adults with ADHD. You might be interested. And then on Thursday, we're doing part 2 on marijuana and the ADHD brain. Part 1 was so interesting that, and so many questions came in that Dr. Olivardi agreed to come on for a second session to answer more questions about marijuana and ADHD. So thank you everyone for being here today. And thank you, Anne, especially. The work you do is so important. And I think this is so helpful to everyone. Attitude is putting up a fair amount of content, including schedules and other information, such as the ones Anne gave. So look at the Attitude website. You'll find on the homepage a link to our coronavirus content. And so good luck, everybody. Hang in there. This too will pass. And Anne, thank you so much. Maybe we will do part 2 if you're up for it. That would be great.
Sure.
Yeah. Thanks everybody. Okay. Thank you.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.